Welcome, Drink with James, episode 155. Look, if y'all have not been to 4.co, maybe just take a minute, hit pause, go to 4.co, log in, check it out. We've got new profiles there. We've got a new tool we're calling Bulletin, which has a bunch of opportunities. Hopefully we're continuing every week to add new stuff from brands, so there'll be opportunities coming directly from brands there, as well as opportunities and questionnaires from us. There's a new testimonials feature, which is something we're super excited about, where you get an Insta story, you have your audience swipe up, go into a form where they leave you testimonials, and those testimonials will be showing up on your profile page. So in general, let's step back. 4 for many years was really just like a press kit. That's kind of how we imagined it, was a online press kit that would kind of update automatically. And the newest kind of iteration of how we're thinking about this and the new tools that we're building is that it's like a LinkedIn profile for influencers. So it's going to do more than just give a snapshot of your stats and what your following is. It is instead now going to show your recent sponsored post, your most engaged content. It's going to have testimonials from your audience. It's also, in the next few weeks, going to have testimonials from brands. So after a brand collaboration, you'll be able to send that brand a link and they'll be able to essentially leave you a review. There's going to be badges that come from 4 staff picked, most engaged, things like that. There's still the brand work that you've done, the press that you've gotten, all of the stats, trend lines over the last year instead of just the last 30 days. So a lot of really good new stuff in there. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out. There's also just some more information that we're asking for. So you think you'll log into the profile. If you haven't been there in a minute, it'll say your profile is 25% complete or something. Go through that onboarding process, fill that thing out. It takes maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but it really does help us to be able to find the right people for brands. I will tell you, there's a part in there that we ask you what your dream collaborations are, and every week we are sending influencers profiles to the brands that we have relationships with, that the influencers listed that brand as their dream collaboration. So this is not just things that we're doing for our own health. We really are building these tools so that we can more effectively recommend influencers for projects with brands. And then for our clients who use the platform, we want to give them more information to understand why they should work with you specifically. So if you haven't checked out the new profiles yet, log in. We haven't really had this much new shit for influencers in quite some time. So we're super excited about it. Hope you are too. Drop me an email if you have any questions, but it should be pretty self-explanatory. So today we're doing things a little different because I am out of town next week. I'm going to Madison, Wisconsin to talk to the Trek bicycle team. And then I'm going to LA to talk to someone that I'm not going to tell you about. And then I'm going to go to San Francisco to talk to other people that I'm not going to tell you about. But I generally am out of town all of next week on meetings. So we're filming 2 Drink with James back to back, which in my old age, I'm becoming more and more of a diva, and I don't like filming back-to-back Drink with James. I get very grumpy, and Tim will ask me 3 questions, and he'll be like, "That was 6.5 minutes long. That can't be an episode." And I'm like, "I don't even care. I don't want to do this stupid show." So
you watch your mouth.
That's only when I have to do 2 in a row. So to avoid that, we're going to change things up a little bit. Today we're not going to do questions. We recently had a brand conference where we talked a lot about storytelling. It's something I've been thinking a lot about, and I recently took my presentation that I did for the brand conference and altered it for a For You event in our office. I just want to take a few points from that presentation and talk first about why should you care about storytelling, how should you think about it, and how should you use it in the partnerships and sponsored posts that you're doing with brands. So a little different, no actual questions today, but still a lot of knowledge, obviously, because I'm talking and drinking. So let's get into it. question one, or point one, is essentially, why should y'all as influencers care about storytelling? That is a valid question to ask. There's something that is, that has stuck with me, that's kind of just like an old truism, right? That like facts don't convince people, stories do, right? Like people do not change their mind when presented with the facts. You need only look at the political parties in the US and what's happening right now in American politics to understand that facts are meaningless in changing someone's mind, and the only thing that matters is a good story. That has been true throughout all of human history. Stories absolutely have shaped this entire world, be it from religious stories and religious texts and just how important those are. Stories about, the kind of person stories about a country's place in the world, a story that they maybe tell themselves. And if we look at the great battle, like the great civil rights and civil liberties battles of the last 100 years, the biggest steps have been taken when stories were being told that could not be ignored. So we kind of understand, I think first, if you can understand how important a story is in changing someone's mind, and if changing someone's mind is influencing them in a lot of ways, then it is essential for you as an influencer to know how to use storytelling as a tool to be able to burrow your message into the brains of your audience. And I think that stories are so important outside of so that is why stories are so important, but why is it that they work so well? I think three kind of core things to remember or to think about when you think about stories is, one, they provide context, right? Like if you are talking about something without context, your audience gets confused, right? So let's just talk about, in this case, let's talk about a sponsored post, and you're doing a post for a brand. The story that you tell about how you came into contact with the brand, the way you found out about it, your experience in using it, that story gives your audience context of what is this, and like essentially what is it doing for me, and like when do I use it, or why do I? So what that story can do when it gives context is tell you who is it for, when do I use it, what does it do, right? Those three things are really important. And sure, you could rattle those off in just a list and say, here's what it does, here's who it's for, and here's when you use it, but that isn't super compelling. So the story can tell all of those things that you need to communicate when you're telling a new idea, but can do it in a way that's entertaining and when someone doesn't necessarily know that they're being informed of something. They don't feel like they're being preached at or lectured to, but they're just listening to a story, but all the while they're getting those 3 points. The next is that they humanize a message, right? Increasingly, as influencers, we're doing more brand messaging. We need those messages, and we need your posts to feel human. We need your audience to be able to put a face to it and kind of understand the human side of what this thing is and why you should care, right? Like the best posts about travel, or the best travel influencers in my mind, aren't the people who, take these ridiculous, amazing landscape photos. It's the people that humanize those places, right? That tell stories that show me a side of that country, that city, that neighborhood that I couldn't get from a landscape photo. It's the human side of the message that really pulls us in. One of my favorite Instagram follows that I've talked about is this woman, Sophie Roberts. We'll have Tim put up a link to her account, but she is a writer for Condé Nast Traveler, and she goes into these ridiculous places and she just pulls out these like human stories that, she could zoom out and take this amazing landscape of, she spends a lot of time in Siberia. She could have these amazing photos of that. But instead it's a photo of somebody sitting in their, hut in the Siberian tundra, feeding them like a lamb stew. And she's talking about that. And that, for me, that humanization, that makes the story real, and it makes it so much more impactful and so much more memorable, right? And that's what you want. You want your stories to be remembered and retold. So to do that, you need to humanize it in a way that goes into the last point, which is they create an emotional connection, right? Like, your audience wants to connect to you. They want to feel like they are your friend. They want to feel like they know you. And to do that, you have to humanize yourself and, open yourself up to creating that connection with the audience. And stories help your audience get to know you. They provide context about you, and they humanize the life that you're living and allow for that emotional connection. So those are kind of the three buckets, I think, of why storytelling is so important, why I think without it, it would be very, very difficult to create compelling content on the internet. Okay. Part two is, how should you think about the story you are telling? So as an influencer, you have stories that you tell and the story that you tell. Those are two different things. Let me explain how that works. The stories you tell is every day. What are you doing that day? Where do you like to eat? What do you like to wear? What are you thinking about? What do you care about? What are you laughing? What are you laughing about? What are you watching? Whatever. The story you tell is what is your kind of, again, this is kind of an icky word, and people don't talk about like personal branding as much as they used to, but what is your brand and what is the story that that brand is telling? And it's not something that you have to be explicit about to your audience, but I do think that if you haven't gone through this process recently as an influencer, I would do it. I would sit with a notebook and I would write down, what do you think the story you're telling is? And how do you think your audience would perceive what makes you interesting or special or different or entertaining or educational, right? So what is that story? Is it the story of, a young mother who is also working and living in New York City? Is it the story of a photographer who is going around the world shooting all of these, incredible people in all these incredible places, and it's kind of this escapism thing? Is it like our good friend Jamie, her story of essentially a woman who has moved to Provence in the 1860s and wears lace and takes photos of herself all day and just lives this incredible fairy tale life full of castles and pressed flowers and fresh baguettes? If you think about the influencers that you really connect with, well, let me just step back. If you're saying, well, I don't want to do that and I don't think that's important, I would think about your 3 favorite influencers and then do that for them. Write down what their story is. I bet in 2 or 3 sentences, very quickly, you can tell me exactly what they're all about, what their thing is, and summarize that really quickly. And if you can't do that for yourself, it's because I think you're not being explicit enough about, tailoring that story and committing yourself to it. Because especially now that the space has gotten more and more crowded, I think it is that much more important as an influencer to have a very clear idea about what you do and do not do, and be very explicit about the story you're telling. Again, when I say you need to be explicit, you need to understand the story you're telling. Your audience shouldn't feel like they're getting a story told to them. It should just feel natural, and every post you do should totally make sense, and it should fit into that larger story. But they should never think that you're telling them a story. And we touched on this a little bit last week of why I think that viral proposal went off the rails was because people figured out that they were being told a story, and then they felt really stupid and they felt taken advantage of and they lashed out. People were totally complicit and they were totally on board when they thought this was like a journey that they were all going on together and this was happening in real time and it felt really exciting. The second they realized that it was a manufactured story that was being told to them, they turned on it like that. I think that's like a very interesting thing to think about, right? So be explicit about it, but don't let your audience know that you're just telling them a story. And look, I'm not saying you have to make up some, new brand or story for yourself. Ideally, you're living this interesting life that people are connecting with. I think it is about discipline and, putting up guardrails and saying, this is who I am and this is what I talk about, so that, people can kind of come to know what to expect from you, and if they can know what to expect from you and you deliver on that, then that's how you build trust and love and emotional connection and all of those things. So. All right, last one, and maybe the one you guys are waiting for. How does this play out in the sponsored post or the post that you're doing for brands? So, one, I do think that, and I've talked about it before, that captions have gotten really lazy. And I think that influencers have gotten really good at storytelling through imagery and really, really bad about storytelling through their captions. So if you're working on a sponsored post from a brand and it is a product that you normally wouldn't talk about, right? So let's say you're a beauty influencer and you're going to talk about a credit card, or you're a fashion influencer and you're going to talk about beauty for the first time. I think your audience expects you to explain why the fuck you're talking to them about this. And I think you have to give them context, right? And help them understand why it is you're talking to them about this. You have to tell a story so that you can humanize it and get an emotional connection, right? Because especially when you talk about something that is outside of the normal sphere of things that you talk about, your influence doesn't follow you to that thing. If I trust you to tell me what foundation to wear, I don't trust you to tell me what credit card I should be using. I don't necessarily trust you to tell me what restaurant I should go to in LA, and I don't necessarily trust you to tell me what deodorant you wear. It doesn't mean that I can't trust you on those things. You definitely can. I think you have to work harder, and I think you have to tell a story about why this is important to you. So that is one thing of just thinking about, is this something I'd normally talk about? If not, make sure you're weaving it into a bigger story. And for a lot of influencers, the story is just that they really love the product. And that's totally fine. I love my deodorant, right? I take Adderall because I'm all over the fucking place. And I'm one of those people that Adderall makes me sweat randomly sometimes. Not every day I take it, but sometimes. And so I use dry, what's it called? It's like DRI something. It's like this kind of prescription, over-the-counter, but prescription strength deodorant. I fucking love this stuff, right? I would tell somebody that if you take Adderall and it makes you sweat, use this stuff. I've tried 10 deodorants. This one works really well. That's an authentic, real story, but I need to give the context and say that I take Adderall, it made me sweat. I searched for a deodorant that worked and couldn't find any until this one. Without that story, I'm just a dude who usually talks about cycling and influencers and takes pictures in New York, and all of a sudden I'm saying, use this deodorant, and you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? Why should I pay attention to that? So you need to tell a story in that case, but also sometimes the story can just be I love this thing, right? And I think what a lot of influencers miss out on is if that's your story, if you're working and partnering with a brand and your story is that you love that product, and as a follower, I only see that product 2 or 3 times, then instantly I'm you're a liar. I don't believe you. Because if you really love something, then you talk about it all the time, or at least you see it all the time, right? And I think that we'll put up a little graphic here of how I think storytelling could be taken care of better with influencers' posts. And basically what I'm talking about is in post 1, you kind of introduce the partnership, say why you're doing it, tell a story, create some context. If it is something like a skincare, if it's something that you're like kind of testing out and you're going to use for a while, setting that up and saying like, I'm super excited to partner and like, I've always wanted to try this, whatever it might be. And then you want to, over the next 2 or 3 weeks or however long the campaign is, in your stories, you want to pretty consistently mention it or at least have it shown, right? Like this is something that Erica Fox from Retro Flame does really well, is that like she will, before a sponsored post, in her stories, you'll start to see a product show up and she doesn't tag it or anything. So then when she does the post, she'll be like, hey, I don't know if y'all have noticed in my stories that I've been using this thing, super excited to partner with them. But then throughout the time of the campaign is happening, you just see it fairly often. Again, not always tagged, sometimes tagged. It starts to legitimize and lend authenticity to that story that like she really likes this product. She actually loves it. She is using it. And if she's not tagging the brand, I'm also feeling like she's using it and not being paid. Like in that post, she's not even tagging the brand, so the brand's not even going to see that. She's just doing it because she likes it. Like for me, it lends so much authenticity to the things that she's doing. And then you follow it up at the end with another post that kind of closes things out for the time being. And again, if it is something where you're like, I've used this for the last 2 weeks, it's been amazing. Like if you're me and it's deodorant, let's say, and you're like, and I've never used this, and it's like, I used this for the last 2 weeks. It was incredible, like absolutely best thing I've ever used. Blah, blah, blah. Cut down on my Adderall sweats, whatever. How we started talking about the Adderall sweats in the show, I don't know, but it's an unscripted show and sometimes we go off the rails. But even if you're not being paid to do that, even if you're not being paid to kind of consistently cover and talk about the brand in between the 2 posts that you're going to do, or even if you're not paid for a second post, I think for the longevity of your account as an influencer, I do think you need to think about covering and talking about the brand more. If the story you're telling is, I love this product, it's really, really great. Because I don't think you can tell that story and only have the product show up once or twice and think that you're fooling your audience. Like they know what you're doing. Which is either you're just being lazy with your writing and you don't have anything else to say about the product, so you're saying, I love it, or then I think you don't actually love the product, you're just being paid for it. So stories can help you avoid that. There are other things to say about a product other than I love it, and you can tell those things in an authentic way that people believe, but just take some time and be really explicit about it before you do a post. Maybe write down a couple concepts and send it to the brand and say, here's 3 concepts I was thinking about. Which one do you prefer? Like that stuff doesn't happen much with influencers, and I promise you if you do it, you're going to look great. They're going to keep coming back for you. They're going to keep wanting to work with you. And you will say, James was right, and I am. So that's the end of the show.